Britain made a choice on June the 23rd, 2016. But what if 52% had voted the other way? No withdrawal agreement, no divorce bill, no years of negotiations. The UK stays in the European Union and everything changes. By 2025, this alternate Britain is £100 billion richer every year, Scotland never threatens to leave, and Northern Ireland's peace stays untroubled. Your life in this timeline would be completely different. June 24, 2016. David Cameron emerges from number 10, exhausted but victorious after the narrow Remain victory mirrors the actual Leave result, but flipped at 52 to 48. Markets surge with relief as the pound strengthens to level not seen in years. Boris Johnson's political career stalls after backing the losing side, while Nigel Farage promises to continue fighting even though momentum has clearly shifted. Cameron knows he's won a battle, not the war, with nearly half the country voting to leave. Their concerns about immigration, sovereignty, and feeling left behind need addressing immediately. He announces stricter enforcement of EU rules on benefit claims, major investment in struggling regions, and promises to push Brussels for reforms. Unlike our timeline, he doesn't resign because there's work to do. The Conservative Party still splits, but differently than you remember. Hard Brexiteers fume about the result, but without an actual Brexit to implement, their leverage evaporates into angry speeches nobody listens to. By late 2017, Cameron announces his planned departure, and the leadership race lacks the Brexit poison of our current world. Theresa May wins by promising steady leadership and controlled immigration within EU rules, becoming Prime Minister in early 2018 through normal transition rather than crisis. Numbers don't lie, and the Office for Budget Responsibility calculated Brexit would permanently reduce UK GDP by 4%. In this timeline, that reduction never happens, leaving Britain's economy £100 billion larger annually by 2025. These aren't propaganda figures or optimistic projections, but the government's own calculations of Brexit's cost completely avoided. Take 3P Innovation, a Warwickshire-based specialist that designs and builds bespoke automation units for the life sciences sector. In our world, they lost a multi-year €2 million contract in summer 2023 to supply an isolator line to a Belgian pharma group, not because their products got worse, but because the client's lawyers ruled that shipping the half-built system back to Britain for final integration created too much border risk once Britain became a third country. The firm employs about 80 engineers instead of potentially more. Multiply 3P's story by thousands of small manufacturers, and you begin to see Brexit's true cost in human terms. Investment tells another crucial story about confidence and uncertainty. NIESR found Brexit uncertainty cut business investment by 13% as companies delayed expansions, cancelled new factories, and moved operations to maintain market access. In this world, that hesitation never happens because the rules stay stable. Nissan doesn't just stay in Sunderland but expands their operations, while the new battery gigafactory gets built because companies know the regulations won't suddenly change. Every major investment decision gets made with confidence rather than anxiety about future trading relationships. London's financial district faced existential threat from Brexit when passporting rights vanished overnight. The ability to serve EU clients from London, fundamental to the city's business model, disappeared with Brexit. By 2024, 40,000 finance jobs are relocated to Dublin, Frankfurt, Paris, and Amsterdam, as entire trading floors emptied and tax revenues hemorrhaged away from Britain. This timeframe tells a completely different story of continuity and growth. Trading desks at banks like Barclays, where entire Delta One teams moved to Dublin in 2023, would have stayed in Canary Wharf without Brexit, forcing the choice between Frankfurt or redundancy that broke up so many careers. The European Banking Authority keeps its headquarters in London, where it belongs, while JP Morgan's new European hub stays put instead of scattering operations across 4 different cities in a costly restructuring. Those 40,000 jobs represent more than statistics on employment figures. Each one supports local businesses, from sandwich shops to dry cleaners to pubs, creating an ecosystem of employment. Their taxes fund schools and hospitals, while their spending ripples through the economy in ways economists call the multiplier effect. In our world, that spending happens in Dublin, but here it stays in London, Manchester, and Edinburgh. The Treasury keeps billions in revenue that Brexit drove away to competitor cities. Financial services overtook manufacturing as Britain's largest export sector decades ago. In our timeline, the EU overtook Britain in financial services exports by 2022, a symbolic changing of the guard. Here, London maintains its crown as Europe's financial capital, keeping its position alongside New York rather than ceding ground to Frankfurt. That matters for every British pension invested in financial terms and every business that relies on city expertise. Brexit meant paperwork, mountains of it that buried small businesses. Every shipment to Europe now needs customs declarations, certificates of origin, and regulatory compliance proof that can run to hundreds of pages. Small businesses drowned in bureaucracy they couldn't afford to manage. By 2024, UK exports to Europe sat 18% below pre-Brexit levels, a catastrophic collapse in trade. The British Beauty Council's 2023 Value of Beauty report documented how £850 million was wiped off UK beauty exports to the EU between 2018 and 2023. Small producers making organic skincare products built their businesses over 15 years, with half their sales going to Europe through relationships carefully cultivated at trade fairs and through word of mouth. Post-Brexit, each shipment needs veterinary certificates for products containing beeswax, ingredient declarations for every component, and safety assessments for each EU country they sell to. One pallet to Paris requires 50 pages of documentation and fees that eat profit margins. As one founder told the British Beauty Council, "I spent more time filling in CPNP safety dossiers than making moisturizer. You can't charge Parisian concept stores an extra €3 a pot just to cover courier paperwork." Alternate history beauty exporters ship to Stockholm as easy as Southampton because one set of rules applies everywhere. Their businesses employ 8 people instead of 3, and they're opening distribution centers in Amsterdam rather than closing workshops. Free trade means actual free trade, not theoretical access buried under practical barriers that only large corporations can navigate. The government predicted 15% long-term trade reduction from Brexit, and in our case, UK-EU trade grows naturally with both economies instead of shrinking. Brexit promised control over immigration, reduced numbers, and taking back our borders. Reality delivered something entirely different, with net migration hitting 600,000 in 2023, the highest ever recorded. Except now it's mainly from India, Nigeria, and China, often on restrictive visas tied to specific employers that create dependencies and reduce worker power. The system became less flexible and more bureaucratic than free movement ever was. This scenario tells a different story about migration responding to actual needs. EU migration continues but adapts to economic conditions naturally without government intervention. When construction booms, Polish builders arrive to meet demand. When recession hits, many return home without needing deportation or enforcement. No visa schemes, no shortage occupation lists, no bureaucrats in Whitehall deciding who comes and who stays. Market forces do what markets do best by matching supply with demand efficiently. The Nuffield Trust documented how EU nurse registrations collapsed 92% in the 6 months after the referendum, from 1,304 in July 2016 to 101 in December 2016. Overall, EU nurse headcount fell 28%, losing 11,000 nurses between 2016 and 2021. Birmingham Children's Hospital, which had 14% EU nationals amongst its 1,176 nursing staff in 2015, saw that share fall to 5% by 2023, creating 94 vacant posts. These nurses left after missing application windows or facing complexity proving status for dependent children or relatives. Specialty paediatric and theatre nurses, posts in big children's hospitals, have since had high vacancy rates that still haven't been filled because training nurses takes years. Here, they never worried about status because nothing changed for EU citizens already in Britain. They bought houses, their kids speak with local accents, and they're part of the community fabric. 20,000 EU health workers left post-Brexit, each one irreplaceable given training time and experience. This scenario keeps them all, meaning your operation happens sooner and your elderly parent gets better care. Not because immigration is higher, but because we didn't drive away people already here, already contributing, already part of Britain's essential services. Scotland's independence movement found rocket fuel in Brexit after being dragged out against their will. With 62% having voted Remain, Scots felt their voice had been ignored by English voters. Support for leaving the UK surged past 50% as the Union faced moral threat. Nicola Sturgeon demanded referendum too, citing fundamental change in circumstances that invalidated the 2014 result. Remove Brexit, and you remove the crisis entirely. Scottish independent support hovers around 45%, historically normal levels that rise and fall with regular political cycles. No material change means no second referendum, and the SNP governs Scotland but focuses on devolved matters like education, health and transport. Independence becomes a generational aspiration debated in pubs and debating societies, not an immediate demand dominating every political discussion. At family gatherings, Scottish relatives debate football and weather instead of constitutional futures. The question, should Scotland be an independent country, doesn't dominate every political discussion or divide families. Sometimes the most important events are the ones that don't happen, and the United Kingdom survives because the trigger for its dissolution never gets pulled. Brexit created an impossible problem that had no good solution. How could Britain leave the EU customs union without creating a border in Ireland that would violate the Good Friday Agreement? The solution satisfied nobody, with a border in the Irish Sea angering unionists and regulatory alignment frustrating sovereignists. The delicate balance of peace, painstakingly built over decades, strained to breaking point. This world avoids the paradox entirely because no border is needed anywhere. Both the UK and Ireland remain in the same single market, so goods flow freely and people move without hindrance. The invisible border stays invisible as intended by the peace process. Peace continues its quiet work of healing divisions rather than reopening old wounds. The DUP never collapses dormant over protocol disputes that don't exist. Power sharing continues uninterrupted as politicians focus on health, education, and the economy rather than constitutional crisis. EU peace funding, €1.5 billion since 1995, keeps flowing to community projects that bring people together. Former combatants work together on shared futures instead of rehashing old divisions. Belfast thrives as a UK city with easy Irish access, attracting investment impossible in our world's uncertainty. Every year, 17,000 British students studied in Europe through Erasmus, living in Madrid or Milan while learning languages and building networks that last lifetimes. Post-Brexit, that door slammed shut with the Turing scheme replacement lacking reciprocity. European students don't come here anymore, and British students face higher costs there. Calculate the compound loss over time. 17,000 annually times 9 years equals 153,000 young Britons who never experienced European study. They're now in their 20s and 30s, entering leadership positions without the languages, connections, and broader perspectives Erasmus provided. Britain's next generation becomes intellectually impoverished by political choice rather than enriched by experience. The European movement's This is Erasmus campaign documented alumni experiences, showing how students at universities like Manchester secured engineering internships with companies like Siemens that would now require German work visas and €1,200 monthly insurance. In this world, British engineering students study in Munich through university exchange programs, paying German fees, not international rates that would bankrupt their families. They work summers at European companies without needing visa sponsorship and return fluent in German with job offers from across Europe. They marry European partners without immigration lawyers charging thousands, and their children grow up trilingual, moving seamlessly between London, Amsterdam, and Munich. That's freedom of movement as lived experience rather than abstract principle. British universities maintain their European character with EU students paying home fees. Research collaborations flourish with bureaucratic barriers slowing innovation. Oxford's cancer research partners with Heidelberg on breakthrough treatments, while Cambridge's AI lab shares freely with Paris on next-generation technology. Knowledge flows generate breakthroughs impossible in isolation. Inside the EU, Britain shapes every major decision with its particular mix of liberalism and pragmatism. The COVID Recovery Fund faces British scepticism about shared debt, making it more targeted and efficient. Tech regulations get British pragmatism about innovation and growth rather than purely French protectionism. Financial rules reflect London's expertise rather than Frankfurt's jealousy. Agricultural policies includes British efficiency concerns alongside French rural romanticism. Every major decision gets filtered through British input that balances competing interests. Without Britain, the EU tilts more protectionist, more regulated, more Franco-German dominated. With Britain inside, balance exists between different visions of Europe's future. Liberal northern economies find their champion in British advocacy for free markets. Eastern Europeans see an ally for Atlanticism against Franco-German continental drift. The EU's global outlook stays stronger, with Britain's worldwide connections contributing perspective beyond European borders. British commissioners, judges, and officials throughout EU institutions shape policies from within. These aren't foreign bureaucrats imposing rules, but British voices writing them. When financial transaction taxes threaten the city, Britain kills them from inside rather than pleading from outside. When regulations might harm innovation, Britain moderates them at the drafting stage rather than accepting them as a fait accompli. Real sovereignty means writing rules, not just following them. Growth compounds like interest accumulating in savings accounts. That's 4% GDP advantage becomes 6% by 2030, perhaps 10% by 2040, as each year builds on the last. Britain pulls steadily ahead of its Brexit timeline shadow, not dramatically, but inexorably like compound interest creating wealth over time. Your personal wealth reflects national success in tangible ways. Pension funds perform better in a growing economy, securing retirements. House prices rise, but wages rise faster, which is the crucial difference between asset inflation and genuine prosperity. In our history so far, assets inflated while income stagnated, creating generational unfairness. Here, both grow, but earnings keep pace, meaning the British dream of property ownership remains achievable for the working middle class rather than receding into impossibility. Public services benefit from a larger economy generating more tax revenue. The NHS has billions more to spend, not from Brexit dividends that never materialised, but from actual growth creating actual money. Schools hire teachers instead of cutting staff when budgets allow expansion. Police forces recruit instead of retreat from the community policing. Libraries stay open, serving communities. Swimming pools don't close, leaving children nowhere to learn. The aggregate of small improvements makes life tangibly better for millions. British culture thrives on exchange rather than withering in isolation. Bands tour Europe without visa applications, destroying profit margins through bureaucracy. Authors translate freely across linguistic borders, reaching new audiences. Artists collaborate without bureaucratic barriers limiting creativity. The creative industries, Britain's soft power engine, runs smoothly instead of sputtering on regulatory friction. Television production illustrates the change vividly. British shows co-produce naturally with European broadcasters, sharing costs and audiences. The BBC creates premium drama with German and French partners that neither could afford alone. Netflix commissioners based in London to access European talent without regulatory complications. Creative jobs stay here instead of relocating to Amsterdam or Madrid, keeping Britain's cultural industries vibrant. Even football feels different in subtle but important ways. Premier League clubs signed European players without work permit dramas delaying transfers. Young British players moved freely to European leagues for development, learning different styles of play. The national team benefits from players experiencing different football cultures rather than staying insular. Connection, not isolation, strengthens British sport at every level. By 2025, remaining in the EU feels as natural as remaining in the UK itself. The passionate debates of 2016 seem historical, like arguments about joining in 1973 that only historians remember. Nigel Farage appears on documentaries about that time Britain nearly left Europe, a historical curiosity rather than active political force. UKIP polls at 3%, a protest vote without real purpose or momentum. Elections focus on real choices facing the country: tax levels, public spending priorities, climate policy urgency, and housing crisis solutions. The EU features, like NATO in political discourse, an accepted backdrop, not active controversy. Politicians promise mild reforms or new opt-outs from specific policies, not fundamental departures from the European project. Democracy functions normally without one impossible question consuming all political oxygen. Keir Starmer wins in 2025, not by making Brexit work, but by making Britain work for ordinary people. The Conservatives lose not through Brexit positions, but through normal electoral exhaustion after 15 years in power. Politics follows predictable patterns instead of Brexit's chaos, allowing long-term planning. Stability breeds success while uncertainty guarantees decline, a lesson learned by watching others rather than experiencing it directly. This is the Britain that chose differently, economically stronger by any measure, politically stable without constitutional crisis, socially cohesive rather than divided, and internationally influential rather than isolated. Where young people inherit opportunities instead of limitations on their dreams, where businesses invest with confidence rather than anxiety about rule changes, where neighbours across internal borders share more than separates them. This alternative exists one decision away, separated by the thinnest of margins. The path taken and the path refused diverge from a single Thursday in June. The Britain that is, and the Britain that might have been, forever defined by 52 versus 48.